Mrs. Lukert, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. Um, yes, maybe we could start with a few words about our organization, if that's okay.
Yeah.
The name of our association is Alzheimer Bulgaria. It was established in 2003, so we've been around for over 20 years now, and it is a patients organization. So it was established by family members of people with dementia and Alzheimer's disease. We offer different services for people with dementia and Alzheimer's disease, such as support groups, also support groups for family members of people with dementia. And overall, our mission is to stand up for the rights of people with dementia and for older adults in general. So yes, this is something that we have been working on for a very long time, and this is our main focus still.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. And I'm so glad that your association exists because I know here the Alzheimer's Association has been a big part of education for me and support groups that I attend regularly. So it's a great organization.
That's wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
Great. Um, the main topic of our conversation today will be about you and your the book that you have published,
Uh-huh.
which is being published in Bulgarian as well. So would you speak very candidly in your book about your experience with the diagnosis? So maybe we can get started with that. So what were the biggest challenges that you faced uh,
Sure.
in coming to terms with the diagnosis?
Yeah. So just going back to even being diagnosed, I started noticing some changes in 2019, and I didn't actually receive the diagnosis of myocognitive impairment until 2021. At first, my doctor thought it was just stress, and I think that happens for people a lot. So when I got the diagnosis in 2021, I didn't even know what myocognitive impairment was, even though I'd been in healthcare for more than 40 years. I've worked in healthcare for a long time, but I had never really heard that term before. So there was a lot of fear of the unknown that came up. I was a little stunned, a little shocked, which I think took a couple months to kind of get through. Um, and I think one of the challenges for me was that uncertainty of knowing how quickly things would change, whether I would even develop dementia or not. It wasn't clear at that point. Because some people with MCI, it's a stable situation or even one that can be reversed. But for me, that hasn't been the case. And I just had the blood biomarker that was just approved in our country last March. And it does turn out, it was positive that my MCI is due to Alzheimer's. So I finally have a full diagnosis
Mm.
many years later. Yeah.
So you would say that uncertainty was sort of the most difficult thing to deal with.
Yeah, the uncertainty and the fear.
Mhm.
And that came from my own, even though I had worked with people with dementia before, when I got diagnosed myself, I realized that thinking of myself having dementia brought up a lot of um, stereotypes is a good way to put it. And, how was I going to turn into a mean person? Was I going to have behavioral issues? Was I going to forget everybody that I love? All those concerns came up to the surface, and I needed to deal with my own personal bias about having this disease.
That makes sense. I feel like that is something that many of our members as well face when they first receive their diagnosis. So would you say that there are some misconceptions that you have had about MCI that you yourself believed before being diagnosed with it?
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception was thinking that it was a very linear thing. You either had normal aging, MCI, or dementia, and not realizing, I mean, I think one of the difficult things, even since the diagnosis and even now, is the inconsistency of change. It's very slow, and then all of a sudden something happens and I suddenly can't do something I was able to do before, and yet maybe the next day I can. So I think one of my misconceptions was the either or. You either have this or you have that, and it's not that simple, as I'm sure anyone who's going through this process realizes.
Mhm. So the unpredictability of each day, I think that is something that you mention in your book as well about good and bad days,
Mhm.
and about learning how to plan around that kind of.
Mhm.
So that's
Yes.
some that's very it's a very important aspect of the diagnosis.
Yeah.
Um, and you mentioned earlier about the people around you as well, the, sort of communicating with them and
Mhm.
um, yes, talking to them about this. How do you feel that your relationships with your families and friends changed?
Yeah, yeah. It's been interesting because I have been very open about it, and I know that's a personal choice. Not everyone is. And not everyone has the insight either of what's going on if they get diagnosed when they actually have dementia as opposed to earlier on. Most people have been accepting, but again, I just find that so many people have these misconceptions. So even my good friends would say, but you don't sound like you have dementia. And I'd say, well, I don't have dementia. Um, so yeah, I feel like in most of my relationships, I have to do a lot of educating people about exactly what's going on. Um, I would say I mean, I wrote the book back in 2020. I finished it in 23. And so it's another 3 years down the road for me now. And as things continue to progress slowly, but definitely some changes, communication with my husband has become more and more important because he can't always tell from the outside what's actually a bad day for me, that kind of thing. And I've been seeing a social worker to help with that kind of thing, and she suggested we come up with some code words. So, like when I have a bad day, when I feel like my brain just isn't working, I call it an Amy day for short for amyloid. Um, but it's a friendly name. I know some people call it not so friendly names that I won't say here, but even though it's difficult, I still want to have a friendly relationship with this disease because it's a part of me at this point. So. Um, the other thing that changed pretty early on for me, I was having a lot of spatial issues, and because of that, I needed to give up driving, which is something a lot of people don't need to give up right away. But for me, I had a couple of near misses, and I decided it was best for everyone if I just didn't drive anymore. So I've lost a certain level of independence that way. And I've also had to call on friends, and a number of friends are kind of like my little group of people I can call on whenever I need a ride somewhere. So, excuse me, that's actually been very beneficial because during those rides, we become closer, because I'm spending more one-on-one time with certain people, and I'm getting to know them better, and they're getting to know me better. So. That's been a positive, even though I really still miss driving, of course. It's so much a part of our culture. But I know I'm not going back to it either. So.
Of course, it is. I'm sure it is a very big change. And as you mentioned, it's a big part of independence as an individual. But it is very, very nice to hear that it has such a community building aspect in a way, reaching out to your friends and yes, your circle of family and friends in order to get closer to them. That's a wonderful thing to hear.
Yeah. Go ahead.
What advice would you give to someone who has recently been diagnosed with MCI or is concerned about their cognition and changes to it?
If they're concerned about their cognition, I really would encourage them to talk to their doctor. I mean, that's kind of the main thing, to start there and then see where it goes. If you've just been diagnosed with MCI or dementia, I mean, it can be an overwhelming diagnosis, and I think it's very natural to feel shocked and scared at first, but to recognize that there's lots of support that you can find, and that it isn't the end of a good life. I think that's one of the most important things. Oftentimes people feel like they're going to just suddenly lose yourself. I know that's how I felt. And that's pretty dire. And I know a lot of people get depressed, or struggle with denial because it's a difficult diagnosis. But at the same time, like I was just saying with the driving, yes, there's the challenges, but there can be the gifts within that too. And so I guess I'm a glass half full kind of person, But I think it's important to do that and know that the process is slow. You do have time, and that's another gift of having an MCI diagnosis. You have time to adjust, not only emotionally and with your relationships, but also to get finances and legal issues in line, find the support that you need, educate yourself, all those things that can really help support you through the process. I also encourage people to get involved, especially in support groups. I think talking to people who are going through the same thing you are is so supportive, and hearing people who are going through the same thing and they're laughing and joking and sharing tips, about how to deal with different issues that come up, it's a delight. And you find a lot of new friends.
That sounds wonderful. I think yes, socialization is it's a very important aspect of keeping. It's a very important aspect of staying a part of the community and staying active.
Yeah.
You in your book you speak very openly also about your relationships, and you also mentioned earlier that you yourself had to do a lot of clarifications with with your family, with your friends about what this diagnosis entails. Is there any type of support that you think spouses, children, grandchildren, or friends of people with MCI would need to navigate this challenge better, more smoothly?
Sure. And I'm sure you're aware of this too, being part of the Alzheimer's Association in Bulgaria. The Alzheimer's Association is a very good place to start for finding out what kind of support there is. And my husband read a book about caregiving very early on, which really emphasized find your support group early in the process. Don't wait, because a lot of times the support caregiver, and Frank, my husband Frank and I have had this conversation a few times, because he's like, well, I don't have to do much for you now. I don't really feel I'm a caregiver. And it's like, yes, but now's the time to develop that circle of help, and support, because it is changing and things are going to we know things will get worse at some point, whether it's soon or 5 years from now. Either way, having that support's really important. And for young children, there are quite a few books out now about, grandma having Alzheimer's, that kind of thing, which think can help normalize it. And speaking to children depending on their age and not hiding it from them so they're not wondering what's going on. But speaking to them in a way that's age appropriate can be really helpful. One surprise area for support that I found was actually on YouTube, because there are several people who are neuropsychologists and gerontologists who they'll have like a 5-minute talk on a particular issue that someone might be facing, such as sundowning, for someone with dementia or that kind of thing. And especially my mom had dementia and she just passed away in January. And I found those YouTubes so helpful to help me understand when she was having hallucinations and how to respond to that. And it's short enough, I could watch it, for just a few minutes, and it gave me the information I needed, So I think that at least here in the US, that's been an additional support that I wasn't aware of until pretty recently.
First of all, my condolences. It's a very recent loss, so yes, my condolences for your mother. And thank you for sharing the such resources that are so accessible. That would be yes, as you said, 5-minute videos. That is a very accessible thing that anyone could be able to identify with and to work with. And also the matter about speaking to children and grandchildren, I thought that was a very important point to note on, because often it's seen as protecting the children, keeping the information from them, and the unknown is often scarier than actually having an idea about what's going on, as you mentioned, and in an age appropriate way, of course.
Right.
So yes, thank you for speaking about these very important aspects of it. Something that we were looking forward to speaking to you about as well was your experience as a spiritual counselor. I'm not sure if that's the term in English, because we were reading the book in Bulgarian. But yes, that is something that is that type of support is practically non-existent in our healthcare system. So we wanted to ask you about that and what its role in the support for people with MCI and their families could be.
Sure, sure. Yeah, so here in the United States, that's called a chaplain, similar to a pastor. And so I'll describe a little bit about the role of a chaplain in general. Basically, a chaplain is someone who's had some theological training of some sort. It doesn't have to be any particular religion. I myself, I'm Buddhist. And most people in this country are Christian. So the idea is that you have your own faith foundation, but you work with people with whatever their faith is. So I'm there to support someone else. And in hospice in particular, a chaplain is seen as an integral part of the team. So there's the nurse, the social worker, the doctor, and a chaplain who supports the person through the dying process, and the family, in whatever way is appropriate for them. So when I talk about the support, it's basically both spiritual and emotional support. And that can be whatever the person relates to. Here in the Midwest, I live by the Mississippi River, and so the river is very important to a lot of people. So whether they have a specific religion or not, their spirituality may be around the river or fishing, that may be what gives them joy and gives them a sense of meaning and purpose. And that's what we look to for as a chaplain, is what gives you a sense of meaning and purpose. So it doesn't even have to be, oh, I'm Catholic or I'm Episcopalian or whatever. It can be it can be what's personally touching to you. Of course, also their religion is very important. And I often found, even with people with dementia, if they were Catholic or Episcopalian, if I'd start reciting the Lord's Prayer, they would start to recite it with me, because it's something that's so ingrained in them that they don't lose that. And it can give them a connection to something that's important to them. I also once had a client who was dying of Alzheimer's. She couldn't speak anymore, but her family had told me that the Bible was very important to her. And I was reading the 23rd Psalm to her, and tears just started streaming down her face. And I don't know exactly what that meant, because she couldn't speak at that point, but I could tell that it touched her deeply. So that's some of the ways that chaplains work here, and that's true in the hospital too. I worked in the hospital for about 13 years, and I also trained chaplains. There's a specific training that chaplains go through, because it's very emotional work, and so you have to have worked with your own concerns and your own emotional responses to things in order to be there to support not only the patient but the family. Most of the time we were called when a family was in crisis, and whatever each family is different with what dynamics are going on for them. And so being able to enter into that family unit and see what might be helpful is a skill that you really need to train in order to do that. And in the hospital where I worked, our doctors and nurses became very reliant on the chaplains coming in and caring for the family, especially in a crisis, while they were very busy caring for the patient medically. So that gives you a few ideas. One more I'd like to mention. For my mother, who I mentioned earlier, for her, the two things that really gave her a sense of connection and purpose were music. And she was musical her whole life. And I had a small photo of one of my Tibetan teachers. Her name is Pema Chodron, that my mom enjoyed reading her books. And she had the small photo by her. And anytime I would see her, she'd point to the picture and say, well, Pema's with me. And even at the end, when she wasn't sure where she was, she thought she was in the wrong room. This was close to when she passed. I held up the picture and she said, oh, there's Pema. And I said, yeah, Pema's here. This must be your room, because otherwise Pema wouldn't be here. And she took the picture and, was then able to calm down and get into bed and rest. So knowing what those things are can be so helpful. Whether you have a spiritual counselor or not, someone who knows you well enough to know what's important to you as things change.
Thank you. Yes, that is, I believe it's a very important thing to point out, as you mentioned, and that is something that we also speak about when we, for example, do workshops for people that may work with people with dementia in the future, that sometimes it's not about what the person is able to say, but about the emotional response. And that is something that leaves a lasting impact. And that can be through music, or as you mentioned, a photograph, or religion. Also, it can be such an important part of a person's life and a person's being.
Yeah.
That it can trigger a response, and it's not about what they can express through words. So
Exactly.
thank you. That's a very important thing to point out as
Yeah.
well. So are there, you spoke about this type of support through chaplains in the healthcare system. What are there other forms of support that you believe are important for people with cognitive impairments?
Well, we mentioned already, but I think it's important to stress our support groups where you can speak with your peers. And I'm not sure what it's like in your country, but here they're just starting to have more support groups for people with MCI and early dementia, rather than people who are further along. We just started one in person here in the city where I live. And the person who's leading it was very surprised that we went, the first meeting, I think there were 6 of us, and now there's more than 14 people signed up. And I think part of it is because people are getting earlier diagnosis than they were in the past. So yeah, being able to talk to your peers is so important. Staying as active as you can in whatever brings you joy, whether that's crocheting, reading books, watching funny movies, it doesn't matter what it is, but keeping those positive habits up can really help support people now and also into the future. And creating those circles of help, you know, I mentioned the friends that I know I can call on when I need something, and that may change as things progress a little bit more, and I might need, hired help as well. But just knowing that your friends and family can be around, you can call on them, that you have people you can call on when you need, not only for you, but for your family. I keep encouraging my husband, to keep up his friendships and keep up the support. And I guess the last thing is just encouraging independence as much as is possible, and looking for those moments of joy, even when things are difficult and challenging. There still can be those little moments when something sparks a laugh or a smile.
Yes, thank you. Those are some very important points that you mentioned about socialization and about staying active in the ways that are still possible for the person individually. Um, and one final question, maybe, what do you hope that readers will learn from or take away from your story, both those living with MCI and their close ones, their families?
Yeah, I think that a quality of life is still available throughout. It's going to be different than it used to be, but that doesn't negate that there can still be love, there can still be happiness. It may be in the little snippets instead of a full holiday day, But I think that's really important, and that there can be hope, you know. Um, I go back to I use this phrase a lot, but there's those gifts within the challenges, and I think oftentimes when we think of dementia and MCI, we think of only the challenges. And so being able to see what the gifts are too, I hope is something that people can take away from the book.
Thank you. That is a very important. I think it's a very good outlook to have because, as you mentioned, a lot of people see the negatives, and that is mostly what people know about the diagnosis itself, MCI, or if they've even heard of MCI or dementia, Alzheimer's, they only know about the negative effects, and it's very important to focus on what is still good, what are the little gifts, as you
Right.
said, in everyday life, and that's a wonderful point to make. And thank you for sharing also about the ways that you manage to do that in your everyday life. For example, the approach with the code words. I hadn't heard of that before, but it's a very I think it's a very good way to deal with difficult days or moments. So that was very interesting to hear.
Yeah, I have a funny story about that. We just had the memorial service just about a month ago for my mom. It was a very stressful time, and we had family visiting. So the next day, I was pretty wiped out. And when I got up in the morning, Frank asked me, how are you feeling? I said, like a Mack truck just hit me. He said, "Huh, it's a Mack truck day." So yeah. So the next day he asked, is it a Mack truck day? I said, "No, it's a small pickup now." You know? So we tried to do it with a sense of humor. And it just helps. It just helps work with it.